And I remember afterwards, a super well meaning friend kind of discouraged me from talking about my labor and I get it. She was trying to help me be sensitive to these other women who had births that didn't go the way they wanted them to go. And I think that was important. But I also remember saying to my husband, like, why can't I celebrate this? Why can't we talk about this? Why can't we talk about normal, quote unquote, normal birth, healthy, the way God intended it to be?
Welcome to the Happy Home Birth Podcast, your source for positive natural childbirth stories and your community of support, education, and encouragement in all things home birth and motherhood. Does an empowering birth change you all at once? Or could it do so incrementally? Pulling back layers as time goes on, exposing truths, behaving more like a well cultivated seed than an instant shift. Hey there, happy home birthers, and welcome to this week's episode of the Happy Home Birth Podcast. I'm your host, Caitlin Fusco, and this week we are speaking to Abigail. Abigail is a wife to her husband, Jeff, and a stay at home mom of 5 very energetic and delightful children, ages 10 to 2 years. She is navigating homeschool and parenting on the central coast of California with lots of prayers for wisdom, grace, and humility. Through her 5 unique home births, she has become very passionate about sharing with women about what a gift birth was meant to be. Now, today, we will get to hear how Abigail's experiences have unfolded over time and the beautiful growth that she has undergone. Let's get started. Please remember that the opinions of my guests may not necessarily reflect my own and vice versa. And this show is not medical advice, it's an educational tool. So continue to take empowered responsibility for your health and your family. Abigail, thank you so much for coming on the Happy Home Birth podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Oh, I am thrilled to have you here. And I know that you've had 5 babies all at home.
Yes.
Yes. 5
Yeah.
babies all at home. And so there are so many things that we can glean from and discuss. I know we're going to focus on this first birthing experience. I can't wait to hear about that and all of the beautiful things after that. But before we start on your actual birthing experiences, let's talk about how you got to the idea of home birth in the first place. What did that journey look like for you?
Yeah. Well, I actually became interested in home birth before I got married. I had a really good friend who's a roommate who, when she got married, she was like, gonna have a home birth. And she was so passionate about it. She invited, I think it was like 6 women to come and attend her first home birth. And sounds risky, for sure, but it ended up being an amazing experience. She was a champion laborer. She had a really long pushing stage. I think she pushed for like 4 hours, but it was still like really calm, really peaceful. So it was a really good first experience. And she just would talk about birth and the risks of, birthing in the hospital and all that kind of stuff. So it kind of got me thinking about that. And then when my husband and I started dating, his sister actually had her first baby at home. And she was very, very passionate about that experience and shared that with us. And so actually, by the time we were, getting married, thinking about kids, my husband was probably more excited about home birth than I was. I was a little nervous, I'm like, hey, I'm the one having the baby over here. Yeah, I was like, okay, well, we'll give it a shot. So, yeah, we got married in 2013, and even before we started trying to get pregnant, we knew we wanted a home birth. So we signed up for Samaritan Ministries because we knew that they were super supportive of home birth, and we're like, okay, we're going to do this so that, when we get pregnant, it's going to all be covered and taken care of. And yeah, they were great throughout the whole experience. They were amazing. So much different than dealing with insurance. So so
Oh,
supportive.
they really are the best. I love hearing that.
Yeah. So yeah, I think we were married like 3 months before I was like, okay, I want to have a baby. And I got pregnant pretty quickly. And I had a really smooth first trimester. I don't really get morning sickness. I think in all 5 of my pregnancies, I can count on one hand the times where I've been like, ooh, I don't feel so good. And then it's
Wow.
gone.
Mm.
I just like gained the most weight in the first trimester because I just have to eat all the time. That was good. I was so excited, but from the very beginning, I just was very anxious about everything. Just really, really anxious about everything. And it's kind of a struggle. It's something that I feel like as a person, I just have always lacked confidence. And so I brought that into this experience, just being really anxious about it. We found a midwife in San Luis Obispo. That's where I'm from, California, Central Coast. And uh, I'd heard about her from friends. She was the midwife my friend had used. She was great. I heard the baby's heartbeat at 11 weeks. And the only thing that was kind of like befuddling to me was I remember she asked me, "So, do you have any questions?" And I remember thinking, I don't even know what to ask. Like, I know we're doing this home birth thing, but I don't know what to ask? So I was kind of like, "Can you like tell me what I'm supposed to ask?" Yeah, I just didn't.
Mm.
I didn't know. Yeah, at the time, my husband had just finished grad school, and we had decided we were going to move. So we went from newly married, newly pregnant. We moved to San Diego. So new big city. I was a small town girl. My husband got a new job. We decided we were going to buy a house. So we moved down there. It was a big upheaval for me. I'm really close to my family. So that didn't help the whole anxiety thing. I spent a lot of nights in bed just like crying, like missing home and just worried. And, we moved right after we heard the heartbeat, but I hadn't started feeling the baby yet. And so there was that fear of like, sh- you know, I didn't know the gender at the time, but she could be dead and I wouldn't know. But yeah, we moved down there. I started researching, looking for midwives, and just came up with some weird, you know, San Diego is a great natural birth community. It's pretty large, but there was some weirdness out there, and I just really wanted to find a Christian midwife. And I heard about one through an older mom friend, and I read one of the birth stories online from where this midwife was attending, and I just was like, "Yes, I want that one." The practice is called Birth Matters. And yeah, I've learned, birth really matters.
Mhm.
I went in for an interview and I actually interviewed with a student, her student midwife, and from the beginning, there was just a sense of peace. It felt like talking to a friend. And I remember her saying to me, "Well, we encourage you to interview other midwives, blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, I don't want to. Like, can I just, I know, I want you guys. She's like, "Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, so found a midwife and that was great. One of the amazing things about this midwife was unlike my first midwife. They gave me tons of information. They had a whole binder for me full of all kinds of information about vaccines and diet and all the different tests that you can or cannot have, how to position your body and move in order to help the baby be in optimal position. All this stuff. It was just like, whoa, all this information. It was amazing. Every time I would have an appointment, they were like an hour long, and they would go over this information with me. And it was just so amazing and informative. And it was like what I needed at the time because I just didn't even know, like I said, I didn't know what to ask. Yeah, that was really good. I was still dealing with a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety. I would lay in bed at night and try to get baby to move. Sometimes I'd wake up, baby's not moving. I'd like poke and prod and move, and she wouldn't move for like an hour. So I'm
Mm.
laying there awake, like, my baby's dead, just going to like jumping to the worst possible conclusion. So that was kind of my mindset for a lot of the pregnancy. And every time I'd go to the midwife, it felt like it was a therapy session.
Mhm.
I would like cry and talk through things. And, we had bought kind of a fixer upper. We were trying to fix up part of the garage to turn it into an apartment. We were going to rent it out to friends. So I was helping with that. I mean, we have pictures of me like massively pregnant up on a ladder, like cleaning cobwebs out of rafters so we can like insulate stuff. And it was just a lot. I was running, running, running the whole pregnancy, trying to just do everything. Yeah, we did a birth class, and it was good. It was a Christian birth class. We practiced breathing, relaxation, learned about different stages of labor, and met some other moms. It was really cool to meet some other moms who are in, first, second kid, third kid, whatever, but they were preparing for birth. That was encouraging. I saw myself a lot as kind of being tormented by this fear. And it was interesting actually. So one cool thing about Samaritan is that when people send you checks with a birth, they send them to you before the birth because you can submit the need before it actually happens. They send you a note of encouragement. And I remember one time I got this note and I'm like, this person doesn't know me at all. And it just said, it says 365 times in the Bible, do not fear. I grew up in the church. I grew up reading the Bible. I had never heard that before. And I remember I kept that note because I was like, wow, like the Lord, He knew I needed to hear that for sure. So, yeah, leading up to birth, most of the pregnancy was pretty smooth. I was very active, walking a lot. I tried to do like pregnancy Pilates. Again, we were fixing up this house on this property. And so there was a lot of running around. But I remember I think it was in our birth class, our instructor just encouraged us to reflect on, I don't know if she encouraged us to reflect on experiences that might help us leading into birth. I don't remember if it was that or if it was just the Lord just straight up reminding me of this, but I remember just being so anxious shortly before birth. And the Lord gave me this memory of, and I hadn't thought about this, and it had probably been over 10 years, but when I was in my early 20s, my dad and I would run together, and he would always push me past what I thought I could endure. So we'd be running on the track, and I would be like, "I'm done. I'm out. I'm gonna go sit over here." And he'd be like, "No, one more lap, one more lap." And I like couldn't not do one more lap. And so I would do it. And I remember thinking like, I didn't think I could do that, but I just did it.
Mhm.
And it was like the Lord brought that back to me. It's like, you're capable of so much more than you think you are. And I wasn't fully convinced of it, but it brought me so much peace leading into that birth experience. So yeah, so we got to 37-week home visit, and up until that point, so we had gone into this midwifery practice because one reason, because the midwife who she'd been practicing for like 20 years, super experienced, and just made us feel comfortable, to know that we had a midwife who'd been practicing for so long. But she quickly was like, "Hey, what do you think about my student midwife who will be getting her license in this spring? What do you think about her doing your birth?" And I remember being like, Jeff and I are like, uh, she's actually younger than I am. She's not married. She's never had a baby. Like, I don't, but we're like, sure. Okay, I guess. Neither of us actually felt super confident about it until the home visit. And I remember we stood in the kitchen and we prayed together. And it was like all of a sudden everything was okay with that decision. I just felt at peace with that decision. Just having her pray with me and pray over me, I was like, it was weird, the shift in
Mhm.
my mentality. The whole pregnancy had had a lot of Braxton Hicks, probably because I hardly ever sat down. And so midwife told me, she's like, "You have kind of a reactive uterus." It was like I would sit down, have a Braxton Hicks, stand up, have a Braxton Hicks, have to pee, have a Braxton Hicks. Everything gave me a Braxton Hicks contraction. And so she's like, "You might go early." And I think my mom had at least, I was like 2 weeks early. So I kind of just expected like I'd have the baby early. But yeah, got up to about 40 weeks and there wasn't a whole lot happening. I was, like I said, I was walking a lot. I was doing the walking, wine, and whoopee to kind of get things going. And I remember, I think it was like I was at 40 weeks plus one. I took a good walk in the afternoon and I started feeling a little crampy. We had a Bible study that night. We went to Bible study and we're sitting there eating dinner. And I'm like, I'm starting to sweat through these a little bit. Like, I'm like, I couldn't focus. I was starting to have contractions and they were probably 5 minutes apart, but I was like, I'm not comfortable sitting here. I can't do this. So I was like, honey, we need to go home. And I kind of had been prepared for this early labor, like the slow lead up to early labor where I could like, go do something nice with my husband or take a walk or something like that. And maybe I just didn't recognize early labor signs before, but yeah, we got home from that Bible study, and I remember I was like, "Okay, well, I should probably go to bed. Like, I should probably try to sleep." And I got into bed, and I was like, "I am not sleeping. This is not happening." So I was like, "You better start filling up that birth pool." The and I didn't know actually at that time, I didn't think or I wasn't sure that I wanted to birth in the water, but I wanted the water. I wanted that tub for pain relief, and we had this beautiful big aqua doula tub with the heating element and everything.
Ooh.
Yeah, and which, by the way, Samaritan covered that too.
Good to know.
Yes, yes. Like I said, they're amazing. Yeah, my husband started filling up the pool, and I was laying on the bed on my side, just, working through contractions, and they weren't real intense yet, but like I said, once it started, it did not stop. There was no, like, gentle lead up, I guess. Well, it was a gentle lead up in that everything was very gradual. It wasn't like I got slammed with intense contractions right away. But anyway, so we had actually my birth class instructor, such a sweetheart. She knew I wanted my sister, my younger sister, to be my doula. She was training to be a doula at the time, but she lived 5 hours away. My birth class instructor, so she's a certified doula. She was also pregnant with twins at the time. She's like, I'll come fill in for your sister until she can get there. So she was there and she was kinda, like, talking to me softly, stroking my leg, and I remember I'm laying in bed on my side just like, "I can't do this. I gotta get in that water now." In subsequent births, I've kind of learned about my body that being on my left side really gets things going.
Mm.
And so probably if I had stayed in that position, I would have had a baby a lot sooner. But I just couldn't hang. I needed to be in the water. So I got in the pool. We have an older house, so the bathtub wasn't really an option. It would have been too crowded. So it was just birth tub in the middle of the living room. And yeah, the doula friend was there. I think my mom and my sister showed up about 1 in the morning. And I was just, like I said, it was just kind of a gradual continuing on with the contractions. I think at one point I got out of the tub out of the pool because I was in there for a while. I don't remember exactly what time I got in. It was probably like 9 or 10 p.m. And then at one point I got out and I was on a birth ball and everything kind of slowed down when I got out and I was moving around actually was which was kind of odd. And so I was like, okay, back in the water. Got back in. I think the student midwife showed up around 4 in the morning. And that I would say that's when the contractions, I was starting to really vocalize through contractions and it's so interesting, Caitlin. You spend so much time worrying about how you're going to handle an experience like birth. And then when I was in it, I was just doing it, one contraction at a time. And I remember, just riding that wave and just trying to stay on top every single contraction. So, yeah, the student midwife showed up and she, like, listened to the baby, but I didn't want her to check me. And it wasn't so much because I didn't just was against cervical checks, because I don't think I even knew enough to be against cervical checks at that point, but I just didn't want her to tell me that it was, like, 4 centimeters. I was just terrified that I was gonna, like, hardly have made any progress. So, contractions were pretty intense at that point, but I was mostly able to stay on top of them. There'd be a few times where I would start to kinda go up in pitch as I'm, like, vocalizing through a contraction, they'd be like, "It's okay. You can do it." But there were only, like, 5 contractions total where I was like, "I'm about to lose control." I was really able, by the grace of God, to stay on top of him. And it was so cool having my mom and sister there. My sister, I remember listening to her talk, I'm like, "Man, she's got a great doula voice." Just
Mm.
super soothing and, like, kinda low pitched and calm. It was so wonderful to have him there. So anyways, midwife showed up at about 6 AM. She didn't really do a whole lot. They, like, checked the baby, and I remember finally she said to me, she's like, "Abigail, you have a pretty good purple line going on." And I was like, "What?" And she's like, "The purple line, you have, like, a line on your lower back that doulas will use to kinda determine dilation." And she's like, If you want, I can check you." And I was like, "Okay, sure, fine." This was probably 6:37 in the morning. At this point, I'm utterly exhausted. Never stayed up all night in my whole life. So she checked me and I was 9 centimeters. And
Mm.
I just remember, like, bawling in relief, just like, "Really? Like, I'm doing this? This is happening?" I think at that point, it was interesting. I don't know, maybe that was well, I never had a clear, like, "This is transition." period. I got hormonal shakes really early on in the labor, which I realized now that that's what my body does. I get hormonal shakes like immediately, but there was never like this, whoa, transition, it just was like all very gradual, thankfully. But yeah, my husband got into the pool with me at that point, and it was interesting. The contractions spaced way out. They'd been like 2 minutes apart, and then they spaced out to about 5 minutes apart. And I wasn't even thinking at that point I would have a contraction, and then I would just fall asleep on his shoulder, and then
Mm.
wake up with another contraction and fall asleep. Like there was no conscious thought. We were just doing this. Did that for about an hour, and then they checked me again, and I hadn't really progressed much. She's like, "Okay, let's get out and get you on the toilet." And the dreaded toilet.
Mm.
I was like got on there and I'm like, "I hate this." But it did the trick. It did its job. So I'm on the toilet and I started to feel like I needed to push. And it was such a comical scene because we're in this little bathroom. It's an old house, little bathroom. I think my sister was in the shower, literally in the shower because there was no other space for her, like, peeking around the corner at me on the toilet. My mom was in the hall. I had, like, a student midwife, my husband, and then the midwife all in there, like, watching me on the toilet. And I started to feel like I needed to push, and I remember just being like, "Oh my gosh, like, this is so intense." Like, I think I started to
Mm.
feel the ring of fire, and I remember being like, "This is not the slight burning sensation they told me it would be?" And I remember looking around, and I think on my face was this expression of like, "Save me?" My midwife just said to me, and we laugh about this now, but she said to me, she said, "Don't pity yourself." Very gently, very calmly, and she said to me, she's like, "Do you want to go to the hospital?" And I remember being like, I think she was giving me a little bit of tough love, which now we laugh about it because at the time she hadn't had a baby, and now we're friends and we laugh about it, and she's like, "I can't believe I said that to you." But I remember being kinda, like, shocked, like, "Oh, okay, okay, yeah, I'm not gonna," and I just went, she's like, "Use all of that energy to push your baby out." And I was like, "Okay." So I really worked to focus that energy on pushing. At that point, she's like, "Well, where do you wanna have this baby?" And I was like, "Well," and this is something funny, you learn about yourself in labor. I think you really learn a lot about yourself, and I found that, like, in between contractions, this, like, kinda sarcastic, like, person would come out, and I remember saying, "Well, we don't believe in infant baptism, so I'm not having her on the toilet." Like, why did I think to say that in the moment?
That's pretty funny. That's pretty
Yeah,
clever in the
I
moment.
know, I'm like, "Where did that come from?" I'm not, like, a super witty person, but I'm like, "I'm not going very far, okay? Because there's a head there." I don't know if she started to crown. No, she didn't, because we'll get to that. So we literally moved from like 2 feet from the toilet to my husband holding me in a supported squat. He's like leaning against the bathroom wall. And that dear man, he held me for an entire hour. And he's not like a super big, muscular guy. And he's like, he told me afterwards, he's like, "I was dying, but you were going through so much more, so I didn't want to say anything." I'm like, "Thank you. Thank you for just keeping that to yourself." So yeah, so I started to push, and the crazy thing was I actually pushed out a balloon of amniotic sac. It was like this cute little water balloon that came out at the time, like, "What's going on? Wait, that's not a head?" And then I actually am really thankful for it because I think it helped me probably not to tear. And then her head came and they gave me a mirror. I got to see her head come, and she was born in call. So
Wow.
her head came out. And they actually did break the sack once her head was out before I pushed her body out, and it was just so crazy to, like, look through this sack and see this little face. Yeah, so they broke the sack and, rest of her body just came, and I remember I sat down on the toilet and held her. They handed her to me, and she was all bloody, and I just remember, like, just crying and crying, just I'm, like, getting teary right now, just so much relief and exhilaration, all the hormonal, all the the things, like, I did it, like, I
Mhm.
can't believe I did it. We didn't know she was gonna be a girl, and it was cute. My husband's like, "I wanted a boy, but I secretly wanted a girl." I'm like, "I don't know what that means, but okay, cool." And I was so excited to have a girl, and they were just like the midwives were like, "That's amazing. She was born in call, like,
Mm.
so cool." And I remember thinking, like, "My bathroom floor is never gonna be the same." But they took I don't remember if I delivered the placenta. I think I probably delivered the placenta there. I don't know if they took me to the bed or what, but I remember just getting into that bed and just holding my baby and nursing her, and they brought me, like, the best meal of my life, which was scrambled eggs. Everything after birth is the best meal that you've ever had, right? I think one of my fears about home birth, oddly enough, was, like, the cleanliness of my home before and after the birth, and I so did not need to worry about that. I mean, when I went back into that bathroom, you never would have known there was a baby born in that bathroom. They just cleaned it so thoroughly and so quickly, like, it was just amazing. They made me food, like, I didn't tell anyone, "Hey, after your birth, midwife, will you please make me food?" Like, they just took care of me. It was amazing. I remember after that, I just wanted to tell everyone. I wanted to tell everyone about this experience, and I wanted to tell them, like, "Look, if I can do it, you can too," you know? The interesting thing, though, Caitlin, was so there were several other women in this Bible study group that we had joined that were pregnant with their first as well, and 2 of them ended up with C-sections out of the 4 of us. 2 of us were home births, and
Wow.
2 were C-sections. And I remember afterwards, a super well-meaning friend kinda discouraged me from talking about my labor and I get it. She was trying to help me be sensitive to these other women who had births that didn't go the way they wanted them to go, and I think that was important. But I also remember saying to my husband, like, "Why can't I celebrate this? Why can't we talk about this? Why can't we talk about normal, quote, unquote, 'normal birth,' healthy the way God intended it to be?"
Mhm.
It just made me a little sad. I was still very happy and excited, but I felt like there was this damper put on that experience. So, anyways, that's the first birth. Um, Totally just rocked my world, right? Because I really didn't think I could do it. Yeah, I did it by the
Wow.
grace of God. So,
Yeah. How life-changing. I mean, this
yeah,
realization, it's just like you said with your dad on the track. Like, I didn't think I could go that far. I didn't think I could be pushed quite that far, and yet I did it.
yeah,
I did the extra lap. I gave birth to the baby in this way, and it was so empowering, and it sounds like afterwards you just felt so just elated with the fact that you were, like you said, by the grace of God, able to have that experience.
yeah, yeah, definitely. So,
The fact that you did have a, quote, successful birth experience with your first at home, the way that you were
mhm.
hoping to do it. How did that impact you as a woman and in terms of future births?
Yeah, well, to be honest, I'm slow to learn things. So,
Mhm. Yeah, I think many of us are.
yeah, so for me, it was a seed planted, I think.
Mhm.
I think the Lord is through my births has taken me on a journey of learning how to surrender myself to Him, and I'm
Mhm.
so far from being there, from achieving that surrender. But and I'll get to that more with the other births. But kind of a theme for me has been in all of my births has been learning, like just like in labor we have to let our bodies do the work, right? Really, you can't make things happen in labor. I mean, we have some control with the way that we're thinking about things, the way we position our bodies, but really, our main job is to cooperate with the process. And I have really seen through birth that that's kind of an allegory for our spiritual lives where, in my first birth or my first pregnancy, I told you I was always trying to do, run ragged. I've always been a person who felt like I can't do enough. It's never enough. I'm not good enough. And I think the Lord has really been using birth to teach me that my job is not to do enough. it's to rest in what he's done and what he's doing. Yeah, I'll get into that a little bit more with other births, but yeah, so that was kind of the seed. That was
Mhm.
that first experience was the seed of that for me.
Oh, that is so beautiful. Wow. Okay, so as we have this, now we have this birth story as a backdrop, really, of
Yeah.
your experience through motherhood and
Mhm.
how these other births interplay with that seed that was planted. Would you mind beginning to kind of share how that has unfolded, how that plant has grown through these subsequent births?
I would love to. Yeah, so okay, so my second pregnancy was a bit of a surprise. I always say I would never choose to have them that close together and I wouldn't change it for the world.
Mhm.
Yeah. So 10 months postpartum, got a positive pregnancy test and I was like, "Ah, like I'm not ready for this." I think I'd only had like 2 cycles and just naively thought like, "Oh, I've always known my cycle." Nope. So it's interesting that pregnancy, I would, like, forget I was pregnant almost because I was so, focused on my toddler. In a way, it was probably a good thing because I couldn't overthink things. The pregnancy again, beginning of the pregnancy was very smooth. I started to have very, very, very severe varicose veins, that pregnancy, and even had a DVT scare where I had a friend looking at my leg, and she's like, "That doesn't look good. You should go in." So I saw a vein specialist and they checked me out and, like, "Nope, it's just a varicose vein." But it's funny, I would, like, research, like, varicose just, when you're suffering through something, you go to the internet sometimes to get some, like, solidarity, and I would read about women be like, "Yeah, my 4th pregnancy, I had terrible varicose veins," and I'm like, "This is my 2nd pregnancy, like, ah." So, I was in compression stockings the whole pregnancy and really, really uncomfortable. But other than that, I used to say, like, "From the waist up, I'm good. Waist down, it's a mess," you know?
Oh, yeah.
But you get through it, and the compression stockings really helped, and I had a little yeast infection I had to deal with. But yeah, like I said, I was in a different headspace, I guess, because I was so much more focused on my daughter. She was pretty needy of me, a lot of, 0 to 60 kind of emotions, which I actually think could have been influenced by my emotional state in pregnancy with her. So there's a little bit of regret there, but she's fine. We worked through it. She's amazing. She's an amazing daughter. Anyways, yeah, so coming up to delivery, you never know what you're gonna get second time around. I kind of had been told it could be faster, and so I think it was like 7 a.m. This was probably just a couple days before my due date. My babies are fairly punctual. I woke up with some bloody show and some contractions at like 7 a.m. I had a midwifery appointment at 9. So I dropped my daughter off with friends at the park, went into the midwife, and they're like, "Yep, you're in labor." So I'll share this tidbit because it's kind of cute and funny. Went to Trader Joe's because I wanted to have a glass of wine in labor. And I went to Trader Joe's. Here I am, like, I hadn't washed my face, done anything to my hair, no makeup. I hadn't slept well the night before. I probably looked super haggard and massively pregnant. And I go in and I got a bottle of wine. And this probably 80-year-old man came up to me and he goes, "You look like you're about to pop." And I said, "Yeah, probably today." And he just grabbed my face and kissed me on the cheek. And
Oh,
I just will never forget that. It was the sweetest thing.
that is so
It was
sweet.
so cute. Yeah, so I went home, got my daughter, went home, and that labor was just, I mean, I was talking through contractions at noon and he was born by 2. So
Whoa.
or yeah, but let me see if I've got that right. Yeah, right about noon, I was like, "Okay," so my daughter I didn't want her there because I didn't wanna worry about her emotionally, and so a neighbor had graciously offered to have her stay. We had good friends who lived on the property with us, so I was like, "Can we get her out of here? We're going. It's go time." The midwife I had with this birth was, the first midwife that I had chosen, the student midwife who had been my midwife with my first birth. She became a close friend, but she stopped practicing for my second during my second pregnancy. So the funny thing was she was actually there for most of the labor because she's like, "I'll be there as your doula." She was there, but she didn't deliver the baby.
Mhm.
Contractions were actually not even that long, like 45 seconds long, but they were 2 minutes apart and they were pretty intense, and I remember telling her, I was like, "Katie, I'm feeling some pressure, and I know last time I felt this pressure, there was a head there. Like, I feel like I have to poop, and there was a head last time I felt that." So she's like, "Let me check you." And sure enough, she's like, "Oh, you're 10 centimeters. Let's call the midwife."
Oh.
I think my husband had filled up the pool at that point. Yeah, he had filled it up, and I was like, "I'm getting in that water." So I got in and, I just remember I was like I started to push, and I remember I was kind of angry that I was like, I
Mhm.
remember this last time, like, I was kinda angry that I had to push.
Mhm.
I think I hadn't because everything happened so quickly, I hadn't really fully, like, gotten into the zone. And also in the birth tub, I didn't really know what to do with my legs when I was
Mhm.
pushing. No one had really, like, taught me that. I had never learned so I was just like, "I don't know what to do with my legs." Anyways, so I was pushing them out, water broke while I was pushing, there was meconium.
Mhm.
I was like, "Meconium," 'cause, you hear, "Oh, it's so bad, they can aspirate," blah, 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 and the midwife's just like, "Nope, it's fine. We're checking his heart rate." They were so calm, and I was just like, "Oh, okay, I don't need to freak out," you know? His little head came out. Not little, there was nothing little about him, but his head came out and just kinda hung out there for 2 minutes. It was like a long slow and again, I learned afterwards, like, that's about as long as they want the head out before the body comes out, but no one freaked out. So I wasn't freaked out. It was so cool.
Mhm.
Anyways, he came out, he took a little while to, like, breathe and make noise and stuff, but no one freaked out again. They just said, "Hold your baby, talk to your baby." So I'm rubbing his back, and I wasn't worried, because they weren't worried. I was drawing confidence from their calm. Anyways, so it was definitely a different birth experience, but again, just that utter euphoria and, I did it. I was a little angry in the middle of it, but I did it. And I'm so excited to have a boy. We were so excited to have a boy. I felt like that birth was just so different. There wasn't kind of that I didn't even have time to be afraid in the whole process of it. It's actually interesting. I was reflecting on this just a few days ago, the difference in personalities between my firstborn and my second. My second-born, my son, when he was a baby, he would just chill. Like, I could lay him down on the couch, leave the room, and he would just be fine. He's always been fine to just go play by himself and just be entertained. And I'm like, I was thinking about that. I'm like, that probably has so much to do with my emotional state during
Mhm.
pregnancy, just being so much more like not anxious about the pregnancy, you know? Anyways, just an interesting thing. I think if I could encourage mothers in that, it's like really pay attention to your emotional state when you're pregnant and really talk to your baby. I think, to be honest, I didn't do that. I I don't know. It just wasn't where I was at, and I didn't feel like it mattered, and now I'm realizing it matters. It really
Mhm.
matters. There's so much more of a connection to our babies in utero than we think. So,
Oh, yeah.
anyways, yeah. So that was the second birth, and then, with number 3, there was a little bit of a gap, bigger gap, 2 and a half, 2 and 3/4 years between the 2 boys and the next 2. 'Cause I was having honestly, it was adrenal fatigue. I was pretty sapped. I had some heart palpitations. I was having numbness in my arms and all this stuff. It was funny. I saw a naturopath, and he was like, "Yeah, if you're pregnant again," which I had just found out I was pregnant. He's like, "Those symptoms will probably go away," and they did. It's like it's crazy how pregnancy kind of heals some things,
Mhm.
settles some things out. So that was really cool. With this pregnancy, I was really learning to support myself more nutritionally. With my first baby, when I got pregnant, I was very thin, and I really like craved like fatty foods, cheese and eggs. And by the time we got to my third, I'd kind of learned more about like the Weston Price diet. And so I was more cognizant of giving my body more fat, more protein. So I feel like I was in a better place in that way. I was taking a really good probiotic, which really helped some things, I think. Yeah, again, with that pregnancy, still dealing with the varicosities, still, again, especially at the end of pregnancy, really facing that fear. Can I do this? And it's interesting. A friend gave me the Bradley Method book, like probably at 35 weeks. And we didn't do any birth classes with subsequent pregnancies. I was like, I don't know that would be helpful, but I did skim that Bradley Method book. It really ended up changing my mindset about labor in a lot of ways. Really, just the visualizing of what's happening in your body, and I ended up laboring very differently. With the first two births, I was very vocal, not out of control screaming or anything, but just lots of vocalization. I was hoarse after both of those labors. With the third, so we actually had a friend who was living with us at the time, and he had his own space, but he shared the kitchen, and we told him, like, just stay in your room, like, don't come out or leave the house, something. Since this labor was a night labor again. And he told me afterwards, he's like, I woke up at 2 in the morning. I couldn't sleep. I was working out in my room and I only heard you twice. I heard you once and I heard the baby. I just was totally quiet. I labored mostly on my side, just left side, and that was very effective for me. My sister got to be there again, which was really cool. And my first midwife, the one who had been a student at that first birth, or who had been newly licensed at that birth, who had become my friend, she attended this birth. And that was really special to have her there. 'Cause like I said, she'd become a good friend. Anyways, that was my first back labor.
Oof.
And boy, was that a surprise. I knew the whole time he wasn't in the greatest position. We actually thought he was breech for a while because he was folded in a perfect pike position with his little feet up here. So I was feeling his feet down by my cervix, and his little butt was so compact. My midwife actually thought it was a head. She's like, so we actually did have an ultrasound just to confirm. And nope, he was head down, but just had those little feet up there. Anyways, so with the back labor, I was just like, whoa, this is different. I don't know if I can do this. And one of the student midwives, there were two there, and God bless them. They were amazing. They were so just, I have pictures from that birth of them like looking at me in the birth tub. And there's just this like love on their faces. I can't
Mm.
explain it, but one of them, she's tiny, and she was so strong, and every time I'd have a contraction, I would just wave my hand, go, "Help, help." And she would come and she would do a double hip squeeze, and she knew just the perfect spot to do it, and it was like magic. I mean, it got me through that labor. And yeah, pushing him out, totally different. Bradley method, reading that book, I knew what to do with my legs. I was like grabbing my legs. They were kind of supporting me from behind. I was totally quiet pushing him out, which was really interesting too. He came out sunny side up. I didn't have any tearing. I call it my perfect birth because he came out like Apgar of 10, blinking, looking at us, and the midwives were like, we were trying to take something off, take a point off somewhere, and we just couldn't. He just came out so perfect. And postpartum with him too, I don't know why I had the instinct to do this, but maybe because it was winter, I spent a lot more time just skin to skin with him in bed,
Mm.
and, that was really special. But, yeah, I think that was, like, another step. That birth was another step in the Lord showing me that He designed me to do this, helping me
Mhm.
to overcome that fear in that way, that I could do something even as difficult as back labor. I never wanted to do it again. I remember after having him, I was like, "Is there a way we can make sure that never happens again? Not the labor part, but the back labor part, Can we make sure that doesn't happen again?" And it did twice, but
Oh gosh.
yeah, and anyways, wrapping up that postpartum piece, it is interesting. He's probably our snuggliest kid.
Oh.
I'm like, my husband's Jeff, like, I wonder if it's because I spent so much time with him skin to skin. I can't help but think it had something to do with that.
Mm.
Anyways, okay, fourth birth. So we really had been hoping for another girl, and it was a boy. And I remember at first being bummed and then just being like, hey, if this were Old Testament times, I would be blessed. I have three sons. Again, dealt with the varicosities during pregnancy. Not really any change there, unfortunately, but I had learned some tips and tricks to get through it. And one interesting thing So this was a technically a COVID pregnancy. This was 2020 when I became pregnant with him. And my husband was working from home, and we went on walks together as a family, and the midwife actually came to my house instead of me going to an office. That whole pregnancy was just so I was so much more at peace just having my husband there, and I think even just having the midwife come to me, my blood pressure was lower,
Mm.
which I thought was interesting. I'm like, maybe I have a little bit of white coat
Mhm.
syndrome going on, even just going to a midwifery office, which was always it wasn't a stressful experience at all. It was super relaxing, but I think just having someone come to my home and just having my husband there, and I had less pubic symphysis pain. I had really bad pubic symphysis pain with my 3rd pregnancy, but I think just even not pushing a stroller on the walk made a huge difference. I guess I forgot to mention this with the 3rd, but one phrase that my midwife had used with my 3rd labor was the phrase I remember her saying it during labor, labor to rest."
Mhm.
And I remember I kinda was like, "What?" But it comes from Hebrews 4:9 to 11. "There remaineth therefore a rest to the people of God. For he that is entered into his rest, he also hath ceased from his own works, as God did from his. Let us labor therefore to enter into that rest, lest any man fall after the same example of unbelief." And in those 3rd and 4th pregnancies, God was really working that idea of laboring to rest in my heart, and I really meditated on it a lot, especially during leading up to the 4th labor. And I was just in awe of, like, the more that I can rest and let God do this, the
Mhm.
better it's gonna go, in birth and in life. So, leading up to that labor, I actually decided to invite a few people to come because I think at that point I felt like, okay, I'm not like this crazy, wild, like screaming, cussing animal in labor. I'm not going to like freak anyone out in that way. So we had actually a young woman living with us, and I was like, hey, if you want to come, if you want to be there, that's fine. And she had a friend who was training to be a labor and delivery nurse, and I thought, hey, if it works out for her to be there, I think it would be really cool for her to see a home birth.
Yeah.
And,
Wow.
it did work out. I went into
Mhm.
labor oh gosh, I think labor really started right around the end of the workday. So I remember saying to my husband, he was out in his office, and I remember being like, I think it's time to fill the birth pool, I need you in here." It's funny, for all of the time, I, again, spent a lot of time being fearful during that pregnancy, particularly of back labor, and, leading up to that, again, a month prior, I just was so fearful, and we were also trying to come up with a name, and a 3rd boy, we like our unique names, and so it was like, if it was in the top 100, nope, we're not doing it, top 100 most popular, so it was actually interesting. I was really Someone made a comment to me. Actually, she said, "Oh, they're gonna name him God Knows." I actually looked it up the following morning. I was in bed. It was like 3 weeks before having the baby, and I looked it up, and this name popped up, and I was like, "Oh my gosh." I woke up my husband. I'm like, "That's it." Because actually on my heart the whole pregnancy had been this thought of God seeing me deeply, knowing me deeply, and still loving me. So that's what we named him. His name is Jediah, which in Hebrew means God knows or known of God. Yeah.
Let me cry. Let me cry. Oh my
Yeah, and we
goodness.
kept on going, "This is kind of a weird name, can we do this?" And then I was like, "Honey, we have to." Like, we prayed for a name. God gave us this name, you know?
Mhm.
That labor was interesting. I'll try to make it snappy, but back labor again. So the whole pregnancy, I felt like he was just up in my right hip. Like, I just couldn't get him out of my right pelvic. My babies like to hang out on the right side of my body for whatever reason. There's more space over there or
Mhm.
something. So it was interesting. I'm pushing in the tub, and I told my midwife, I'm like, "I don't feel like anything's happening." And I think I had broken my water. I did that with my 3rd and my 4th, and it was interesting. When I broke the water, I felt like it empowered me, you
Mhm.
know? But I was like, "I don't feel like anything's happening." She's like, "Well, why don't you just lay on your left side?" And I did, and oh my word. Talk about fetal ejection reflex.
Wow.
He was out, I think, in, like, 3 pushes, and he was my biggest
Mhm.
baby up to that point. He was over 8 pounds. The 2 previous boys had been almost 8 pounds. He was, like, 8'4", so not
Mhm.
huge, but my biggest baby. He was so perfect, and I remember just being blown away at that, like, that change in position, how much of a difference it made. So, yeah, just was so thankful to God gave us that name, and it was so special. Then in between the 4th and 5th babies, we actually moved back to my hometown, which was really, really special. And so I actually was back with the first midwifery practice that I had been with my first, but it was a different midwife, and she's actually a Christian, which was really cool. And she had done births for a lot of my friends. And so we were really hoping for a girl, but we actually decided not to find out. I had thought we would want to find out because I kind of wanted to be prepared I didn't want to be disappointed when the baby came. I really, for my daughter's sake, she was 8 at the time, I really didn't want her to be disappointed because with each of the previous 2 babies, she had wanted a baby sister, and she had had such a good attitude. It was such an encouragement to me. She'd been so sweet about it. She just loves the babies. And it was a really special bonding experience for us, because I think we've kind of had some issues bonding. So that every time I have a baby, it's always been really a strong bonding experience. But I remember being like, I don't want her to be disappointed. And then I was just like, you know what? I said to my husband, you know what? We can't shield ourselves from disappointment in life. And I can't shield her from disappointment. I'm not going to find out. This is a tangible way I'm going to trust God for
Wow.
whatever He gives us. Of course, when I was holding the baby in the birth pool, I was having second thoughts about that because I was like, if it's a boy, I don't know what I'm going to do. It wasn't. So during that pregnancy, still had really bad varicosities. But one little interesting tidbit around 28 weeks, I also have like issues with B vitamin absorption. So I've struggled with energy during some my pregnancies, just where I'll suddenly feel just like really weak. But I started taking a ton of beef liver, and chlorophyll around 28 weeks, and it was crazy. All of a sudden, I mean, up until that point, I felt like the varicose veins were like I told my husband, I'm like, "It's barely manageable. I'm managing, but it's barely manageable." And around that time, it always gets better at the end of pregnancy when progesterone drops, and it was like that progesterone drop, but at 28 weeks.
Mm.
I don't this is just anecdotal, but I was like, "What changed?" "Oh, I started taking beef liver and chlorophyll at around that 28-week mark." So I told him, I'm like, "I'm never going without that in pregnancy again." We are doing that. We're on that train. Yeah, so that really helped during pregnancy. Leading up to labor, I was really fearful of back labor, and my midwife suggested, like, "Hey, we could have a TENS machine. We can do sterile water injections," which I don't know if you've heard of those. Um, and I was like, "Sure, I would like to have some options if I need them." So, like I've said, my babies are always punctual. I think the first one was the latest. She was like 2 days late. Oh, fun tidbit a bit, she was also born on her cousin's birthday. So my sister-in-law had a scheduled C-section that day. So my parents became grandparents times 2 in one
Wow.
day. Yeah. She had a boy, I had a girl. That was really fun.
Mm.
Due date came, went. I kinda thought she was gonna come early. Don't remember exactly why I thought that, but I did, and days are rolling. My midwife was scheduled to leave the country, like, the following week, and I knew, someone will be there, it'll be fine. But, you kind of want to be with the midwife you've been with the entire pregnancy. And also, I had a dear friend who had attended each one of my pregnancies. She's starting with the second. She actually was 16 years old. She's taken photos of each one of my births. She's my first midwife's younger sister. She's just fabulous. She's been doula, she's been photographer. She stayed with us a few times when I was pregnant and
Mm.
after I mean, she's just been amazing. Anyways, she had come all the way from Montana to stay with us, but she had to leave. She had actually changed her flight already once. So I'm like, okay, what is going on? My body has forgotten how to go into labor. Like, and I just felt massive. I felt bigger than I had ever felt before. I think I'd probably put on a little more weight than ever before. So finally, they're like, I was just like, I don't know what's going on. And the cool thing was the fear that I always, have had to work through was like the Lord gave me that extra week.
Mm.
And by the end of that week, I was just like, I'm so ready for this baby to come out. I don't care how it happens. I just back labor, bring it on. Like I want this baby out of here. So it just really removed a lot of that fear. And I spent a lot of time doing the mile circuit. So I spent a lot of time resting, which was really good because that's always been a little bit of a struggle for me. and, having 4 kids, it's a little bit challenging to rest. But having that friend there, I would just be like, "I'm going in my room, you got this." And, we had scheduled a membrane sweep for Monday morning. I think the midwife was supposed to leave Tuesday, and my friend was also supposed to leave Tuesday. And so we're like, "Okay, Monday morning, we'll do a membrane sweep, see if we can't get things going." I think I had started to have some signs of labor, but things just weren't happening. So, but Sunday night, 2 in the morning, had started having contractions.
Mm.
The crazy thing was I was actually able to go back to sleep. They were, like, pretty strong, but I laid there in the, what is it, open knee chest position, I think, in my bed, and I was actually able to sleep through some of them. But then at about, like, 6 or 7, they started to ramp up a little bit, and I woke up my husband, and I texted the midwife, and she actually had something at, like, 11 AM that day, and I told her, I was like, "Hey, I'm having contractions." She's like, "Okay, well, yeah, we'll probably have a baby this evening." I got up, we're having breakfast, I'm sitting at the breakfast table, and I'm, like, putting my head down in between for each contraction, "Everyone be quiet." And I was like, "Jeff," I'm like, "I don't think we're gonna have a baby this evening. I don't think things are slowing down. I think this is happening." And I texted the midwife, I'm like, "I'm so sorry, but I think I'm gonna need you before," she's like, "No problem, I'll reschedule what I had." And, I think I went into labor at really active labor was like 8 in the morning, and she was born by 1. Laboring on my left side again, really just using all my energy to just focus on relaxing, laboring to rest.
Mm.
And really needed I had back labor again. So every time there was a contraction, either my friend Rachel or my husband would come and just push my hips down into the couch as hard as they possibly could. And yeah, we filled up the birth pool in the living room. We were in a tiny little 2-bedroom, 1-bath house. So it was like living room, and that was it, less than 1,000 square feet. And midwife showed up, and I think they suggested I get on the toilet, and I did, which of course was miserable, but it actually kind of felt better with the back labor for some reason. And got into the birth tub. I knew she was coming, and it was really interesting, Caitlin. I feel like this birth kind of brought some things full circle. It's like with every other birth, when I've started to feel a little bit pushy, I'll say, "The baby's coming," or like, I like kind of announce. And that time, I remember telling myself, "I'm not going to do that. I know, like, I just need to wait. It's not quite ready. It's not quite time." I like had that confidence in my body at that point. And also, I remember having this thought, having the "I can't do it" thoughts. Is this going to happen? Is this actually going to happen? And I remember telling myself, "No, you've felt this before, and it's always about to happen." Just like I had gained this confidence through all the other experiences. So by the time I was actually pushing, I hadn't, like, announced. So I kinda made, like, a sound, and they were like, "What? What's going on?" I'm like, "There's a head." She just oh my word, I was silent the whole labor, and when that head came out, I've never been one to use words like primal. It's just not me. But I remember as I'm, like, yelling my baby out, I was thinking to myself, "That is an extremely primal sound you are making." Like, I'm thinking this as I'm pushing this baby out. It was funny, I had a young woman there, she's only, like, 14 years old, but she was kind of interning under my midwife, and I said, "Hey, if you wanna come to my birth, that's fine." She's, like, one of 7 kids, almost I think her mom's due with 8 any day now, and, her mom, like, has a baby in an hour and, like, hardly makes a noise, and here she is at my labor with me, like, yelling. And, I asked her afterwards, I was like, "Annie, did I scar you?" And she's like, "No, it was awesome."
Oh.
So, yeah, yelled that baby out. She came out, and interestingly enough, she came out to, like, here and then kinda stopped. And I
Mhm.
was like, "Can you just pull her out?" Or I didn't know it was a girl. "Can you just pull the baby out? And what's going on? Why isn't this done yet?" Anyways, she came out right on my chest, and I remember, like, I can't look. I can't look to see if it's a boy or a girl. So I handed her to my husband because the midwives were like, "What is a boy or girl?" I just wanted to hold her for a minute and like, just don't rush me. I'm just gonna enjoy this. And handed her to my husband, and he says, "It's a girl," and we were just so overjoyed. And my midwife goes, "Are you sure?" And I'm like, he's like, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure." We were just laughing about that so much afterwards. And, just, like, so oh my word, I just can't explain the joy. It was like joy upon joy, just to
Mhm.
have another girl and, delivered the placenta, got into bed, and kids came to meet her. And I will, till the day I die, remember the moment my daughter met her. She cries, but she's not like a happy crier. And I mean, it was just happy tears of joy, just like, oh, it was just the most precious thing. And we just have this beautiful photo of us all in the bed, just like beaming, holding her. And something that was interesting. So, one of the student midwives says to me as she's leaving, she goes, "You're a goddess." And I remember thinking, I was like, "What?" But it was so interesting, Caitlin, because my reaction was like, "I am not. Like, I'm just a woman. I'm just a woman who chose to do this because I believe God can make it beautiful." That's actually, so wrapping up that last birth, that's actually something I really want to share with people. And most people who are listening to this podcast will already be considering a home birth, but I think I felt like I had to be somebody special to do
Mhm.
this, to experience natural birth this way. And you don't. You just have to be willing to take what God gives you. So that's one big takeaway for me.
Mm. Wow, Abigail. This has just been so beautiful to hear how you've unfolded in your birthing experiences, how you've unfolded as a mother, and to see that seed planted in the beginning and how it really has grown is so encouraging. And you've already given such a beautiful word of wisdom and advice here just now, but is there anything else, in relation to your experiences in particular that you want to share with the listeners that you've learned?
Yes. I think it's so important for women to hear that this experience, birth, can be beautiful from the beginning. I started actually, so one thing I failed to mention was I started listening to your podcast when I was pregnant with my daughter, my last daughter, because I felt like I stumbled upon it and I felt like I needed the encouragement. And it was just so encouraging. And I never stopped listening, even, even
Yeah.
after having her. But you just hear so many traumatic first birth stories. And there can be a traumatic birth even at home, but it's so much more common in the hospital.
Mhm.
And I just want women to know it doesn't have to be that way. It really doesn't have to be that way. You can trust your body and the process from the very beginning, and it can be so beautiful. And it's not guaranteed that it's going to work out, but the way that you think it's going to, as you learn with birth, you never know what you're going to get. But I can guarantee that if you let it, the Lord will do something beautiful through it. And I think it's such a shame that as a society we rob women, particularly Christian women who know the Lord, but we rob ourselves. And really, the system, I think, has robbed women of the beauty of this experience. And so I just, if you're on the fence, go for it. Like, just go for it. The Lord wants to give you something beautiful through it from the very beginning. Also, something that I was thinking about is it's okay if it's hard. I think I kind of falsely believed that if I wasn't like singing through contractions and like just loving every second of my birth, which I didn't, it was hard, it's okay. It doesn't mean that you're failing. It doesn't mean that you're not close to the Lord. He brings us through hard things, and
Mhm.
it's always beautiful on the other end. So I think sometimes, like, wanting to shy away from disappointment, or, in our culture, we want to shy away from things that are hard, but God brings us through the hard for a reason. So, yeah, that was another encouragement that I have.
Mhm. Absolutely incredible. Abigail, this has been just such a beautiful episode, So lovely to hear your birth stories. Thank you so much for coming on the Happy Home Birth podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real treat.
How lovely to watch a mother blossom. As we head into today's episode roundup, I want to focus on a few of the many potential takeaways we could have from this episode. Number one, and really hearkening back to the question I asked at the beginning of this episode, Abigail shares how her birth experience did not overhaul who she was in one instant. I'm sure that it did actually in many ways, but in connection with her perspective, her spiritual life, and beliefs about herself, Abigail's first birth was a seed planted. Over time and through very different births, that seed was watered, cultivated, and grown to fruit. We see this fruition in her most recent birth, where 1 week after her due date, she is so ready to meet her baby that she has completely relinquished all fear of how her baby will be born. Back labor again? Who cares? She was fearless and ready to surrender to the process of birth. And that leads me to the second point, surrender and submission. Abigail said something so beautiful that had me thinking about this idea. The more we are able to surrender to our Creator, the more He will work and do. Here we are circling around the concept she brought up about laboring to rest. We labor, yes, but we must rest. We must submit. We must surrender so that He can bring about the bounty that He desires to bring about. If we continually labor, whether physically or metaphorically, in our own strength, there will be so much less of a harvest. But the more we submit, the more we trust, the more we open our hands to the experience that He has for us, the more we get to enjoy His great abundance. And finally, Abigail touched on something that I think is such a tangible reminder. You don't have to experience the negative birth before you plan for the positive home birth. This is your permission slip. Give it a try. Let the Lord bless you however your birth unfolds. Let the seeds be planted. All right, my friends, that's all I've got for you for today. I'll see you back here next week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Are you looking to extend the home birth support, encouragement, and education? Join us in our Facebook group, Happy Home Birth Podcast Community, and check us out on Instagram at Happy Home Birth Podcast.